Welcome back. Last time we finished up with the end of World War One, and now we're going to see America, well, in the titles of this lecture, return to normalcy, get back to the business of being what America thinks itself to be. And we've got Warren Harding here, who's looking very stern and lecturish, pointing to us and giving us this return to normalcy idea. Well, we have to deal with the backlash for the most part of the psychological impact of the war, of what it did to us, of what it did to our outlook. America had spent the majority of the 19th century staying out of European affairs because, as George Washington warned us, it would draw us into needless conflict, and it would draw us into destructive conflicts that weren't the concern and weren't the best interest of America. Well, World War I is going to prove that point 100% correct. The old acrimonies and animosities of Europe are going to continue to grind on and on and on. And most people in the 20s in this idea of returning to normalcy are going to long for a day when we didn't necessarily get ourselves involved in the wider political sphere, and particularly in European conflicts. Generation of writers like D.H. Lawrence and F. Scott Fitzgerald and Ernest Hemingway that all served in the war are going to be coined as this sort of lost generation that are disillusioned by and transformed by the senseless destruction and slaughter and the futility of war. And it's going to have an enormous impact on foreign policy, almost a continuation of Wilsonian moralistic and idealistic policies in a wider sphere. America won't sign up for a lot of it. America will try to keep its distance from a lot of this. And hence they're going to continue to push for isolationism. And when we finally unpack all of the propaganda and all of the information that was fed to America at the beginning of World War I, you realize that the British weren't 100% honest with you, that there were no atrocities committed by the Germans in Belgium other than marching across Belgian territory. And you almost feel tricked into fighting this war. And so there's going to be a significant pushback for America to stay out of the wider European affair. Now, unfortunately for us, while Americans are looking inward, Americans are looking towards rooting out its domestic problems and avoiding the transformation of society as we move into the 1920s, the Roaring 20s. We're not necessarily going to realize that staying out of European affairs is a rather impractical thing, that industrialization and the unlocking of our industrial might for World War I is really going to tie our economy to a worldwide economy. But these things aren't necessarily the primary concern of America. Politics in the 1920s in particular, the politics of Warren G. Harding, are going to return to the Gilded Age, high tariffs, low taxes, government cooperating with business, and government at this point shedding off all of the obligations that it took on during Progressive Era foreign policy and domestic policy. And so when we look at governmental spending that was at its highest at 18 billion, it goes back to 3 billion in terms of governmental spending in 1925. We give tax relief, and of course we furlough a lot of our armed forces, and the tax relief that really goes to the wealthy, and it's not a big shock. But the 1920s is when the Republican Party becomes the party that we think of today. Corporate cooperation, small, streamlined government, tax relief, and going back to the Hamiltonian era of trickle-down economics and entrepreneurial creation of jobs through economic stimulus by allowing the rich to keep their money, and therefore by that function they would provide more jobs, create more industry, and help the economy that way, commonly known in the 1980s as trickle-down economics. Most people are going to be shocked to learn, though, that when the 30s come around and the height of the Depression hits, you realize that Very few people in the upper echelons of this highly stratified economic realm of America pay any taxes. And that would kind of dovetail nicely with the narrative that's out there right now of the super rich not paying much in terms of taxes. Now, 1920 marked the passing of the suffrage amendment. Women were allowed to vote, and there was always this great fear, this misogynistic fear that, oh well, they'll just elect the first handsome guy that they see. Women aren't intelligent enough in a political sphere, and the joke about that, and again, the very sexist, very misogynist joke about that becomes that they were just going to elect the first wealthy, dignified, and handsome man that they saw, and Warren G. Harding is going to fit that bill as he's running against the Democratic Party as a Republican, and he's the one that coins the phrase of return to normalcy that and then later his Vice President Calvin Coolidge gives us the phrase, the business of America is business. And this does see a return to the government hands-off corporate enjoyment of a free reign to make as much money as they could possibly engender. And Harding goes in there with Grant and the Gilded Age presidents as some of the most corrupt. And Warren G. Harding was also, had a number of sexual indiscretions with women, including children, that will make it into the public headlines. And I don't know if any of you have seen a show called Boardwalk Empire. Steve Buscemi plays this sort of prohibitionist era bootlegger out of Atlantic City. They work in both the Harding narrative and his illegitimate children into that story. He's most famously noted for the Teapot Dome scandal, which was in a sense a scheme to allow oil companies and resource companies to drill on government lands, and a major scandal involving massive amounts of kickbacks and bribes. However, Harding is going to die of a suspected heart attack in 1923, so he serves 2 years as president. And we say suspected heart attack because there are still some conspiracy theories out there that it was his wife at the time, ashamed by the philandering and the illegitimate children and the corruption, that may have poisoned him. Now, wouldn't be the first time that somebody say, oh, well, she was angry, she might have poisoned. And that's not the reason why the suspicion is out there, that she very hastily before the autopsy had him cremated so that an autopsy and test couldn't necessarily be run. But either way, he dies, and he brings Calvin Coolidge to the presidency. And Cal was famously noted for being a man of few words. Reporters once asked him, or once made a bet with him, I bet I can get you to answer a sentence in more than 3 words, and he just kind of, very coolly and very calmly replied, "You lose." But he gives us the phrase, "The business of America is business," and so the 20s see us moving back to the Gilded Age, business and industrialization, and trying to put away the concerns of reform and putting away the concerns of the progressive era. We forget the progressive era reforms, in part because of fear of socialism and communism, but also in part because we're going to focus on leisure, distraction, and other things that are going to capture the imagination of the American people, and we'll talk about those as we go forward. Here you see an electoral return, which gives you, Wisconsin is still the heart of progressivism, gives its electoral college votes for Battling Bob La Follette, but the South votes strongly Democratic, the solid South, and they will for the next 40 years. Until they realized the Democratic Party had moved on from what later becomes known as the Dixiecrats, Southern Democrats as opposed to Northern Democrats. But Coolidge, this is here his 1924 Electoral College results. What we see in America post World War I is basically a consumer revolution, where America for the next 50, 60 years is going to have the highest standard of living in the world. And we're going to see our industrial output and gross national product, the GNP, go up. And we're going to see people take advantage of this as industrial output goes up and gross national product goes up. Prices are going to go down and per capita income of people are going to go up. So that means we're going to have more buying power to buy the products of the Industrial Revolution. And the key to all of this is going to be electrification and the increase in production from every worker's hour. That goes up by 75%. We can electrify, which means longer working days. The incandescent light bulb made factories no longer subject to the ebbs and flows of the seasons and the differences in the hours of sunlight from the days. And of course, we're going to make all of these factories more efficient, and we're going to boost all of this production by 40% and industrial output, doubling it through technology. Which means, and this is one of those hidden factors that's going to really give us problems as we move towards the Great Depression in the 1930s. We're producing more, faster, better, cheaper than ever before. But one of the key indices that we always talk about today, and if you watch the news today, we talk about our economic slowdown, we've produced 11,000 new jobs this year or this month in this reporting cycle. We're not producing more jobs. The population is going up just through natural increase in immigration and migration. We're producing more, cheaper, but we're not producing more consumers. We're not employing more people. That's going to leave us again with that fundamental underconsumption and overproduction problem. But in the 20s, we're not thinking about that yet. We're not managing our economy in that way. We're not looking at all the indices in the way that we look at it today because we're not thinking about it in a worldwide sort of scale. So what are we going to do? We're going to buy stuff. We're going to get all of the labor-saving devices. We're going to get all the electrified devices. We're going to get the electric range and the toaster and the vacuum and the electric washing machine. And we're going to fill our houses full of it. And we're going to buy it on credit. So not only is our income going up, but our ability to buy is going to go up. So much like a college student that gets their first credit card, they usually max that thing out pretty quick because you're not necessarily thinking about the hard economic times to come or thinking about responsible spending. A lot of people in the 20s aren't thinking about it, but they should. One of the things they spend the majority of their money on and their credit on is going to be the automobile industry. And we're going to buy the Standard, which was the Ford Model T. This is the 1925 version of the Model T. It is very efficient, practical, and in 1925 we're producing 9,000 of these in a day, one every 10 seconds. And from the point when the giant assembly line that opened in Detroit, Michigan, when it opened, a frame would start at 93 minutes. A frame would start at one end of the assembly line, and an hour and a half later a car would drive off of that assembly line. It never stopped moving, and Ford workers in that assembly line would bolt and would bracket and would put everything onto it, and then bang, it would drive off the line 93 seconds later. Okay. Now that assembly line starts in 1913. It reaches its peak in the 20s, the peak of production, the peak of efficiency. The goal was, in Ford's mind, to democratize the automobile. And it works as we get into the mid-20s that the price had gone from $850 down to $300. And credit plans mean that, just like you see on the commercials today, 7 years, 6 years, 0%, we just want you to buy a car because we've got a consumption problem. Credit plans are going to reach the majority of the people. We make it affordable, and this is going to have, when we talk about changing societies and we talk about changing cities and we talk about impacts on American culture, the automobile and the democratization of that truly does alter society. It alters our towns, it alters our commutes, it alters everything about American culture at that point. Now, Ford is only one of hundreds of manufacturers. He's so successful he didn't have to advertise. The fact that there were so many Model Ts out there on the road, that was his best advertisement. They were cheap, they were simple, you could have it in any color so long as it was black. Other automobiles and automobile manufacturers are going to trade on that great American idea of wanting the next best, wanting customization. You want it in a different color? Okay. You want windows? Okay. You want a hardtop? Great. The Model T was cheap, it was easy to fix, it was durable, and once you got it, your automobile situation was handled. Unlike the automobiles today, they weren't made out of plastic. They weren't made out of parts that were designed to fail. These were made out of sturdy, solid spot. And if something did break, the parts were affordable and easy to replace. So that's why Ford becomes the king of all of this. Everybody else, they got to market against that aggressively. And this is one of those interesting stories. The Model T, as it is there, ends in 1927, and they switch to the Model A, which is hard top windows and becomes iconic. The Model A from 28 to 34, 35 is some of the most famous automobiles out there in the world. They thought the Model T sales were dropping because of disaffection. Unfortunately, though, what was lurking for us, and we have the luxury of knowing what's happening, of what's going to happen in 1928 and 29, and where the Depression is coming from. We're looking into the abyss at this point. Ford doesn't know that. They think people are just, disenchanted with the Model T. We need to reinvent ourselves. Unfortunately, no. That consumption issue is going to come back and really bite us as we're moving forward. Now, what does the automobile do for us? Well, it completely alters our industries, because think about it. If you're building a car, you need sheet steel, you need rubber, you need paint, you need glass, you need lubrication in either forms of engine oil or any of the other components for the axles and all the other greases that are necessary to keep these cars running. You also need petroleum, gasoline. You need all of those industries. And of course, the pursuit of new oil reserves, the pursuit of rubber, the pursuit of all of the raw materials forces us to the Pacific Rim, the Southeastern Asian corridor, also South America. And as we put more and more automobiles on the road, like the railroads driving industrialization in the steel industry and the coal industry, cars now are going to drive everything else in American society, and even still today. And our urban landscapes are fundamentally altered because of that. We're going to build roads. We're going to continue the suburbanization that hit with electrified rails. We're going to continue that idea as well. And then in the 20s, we've got to try to develop a code of what happens when cars meet each other on the road. We've got to start putting out traffic lights. We've got to start to devise traffic laws. We've got to try to license some of these drivers so nobody kills each other. Traffic accidents are going to become one of the leading causes of death as we start moving forward. And if you can imagine an urban environment like New York, pedestrian heavy, with horses and with electrified trains or subways, and now automobiles running riot across the roads. This is a chaotic situation, and as such, everybody starts to move further and further afield. when you start allowing people to drive and commute with an automobile, that makes the suburbanized areas a little bit more valuable. There's a great book by, I can't remember his first name, but his last name is Johnson. It's called The Crabgrass Frontier, which chronicles America's fascination with a front and a backyard and suburbanization that fuels off of electrified rails and then later automobiles, reaching its high point in the 60s and the 70s with that kind of Leave It to Beaver, Wonder Years kind of world. But the outlying areas become more and more valuable. Or, as we're now building with steel, you're going to see the mega skyscrapers start to appear higher, away from the noise, away from the smell of the urban environments. Some downtown areas like New York and Chicago will continue to be valuable. Others are going to start to move further and further suburbanized, with industry or offices or professional endeavors moving into these skyscrapers as they start to be built. And by 1929, you have almost 400 20-plus story buildings in an American society that is heavily investing in all of this. But meanwhile, think about just the other complementary industries that come with an automobile. You're driving it around. Got to have gas stations, right? If you're going to go on an automobile vacation, you got to have hotels. If you're going to suburbanize, you got to have shopping centers out there and grocery stores and places to buy food. And then if you're going to live a social life with a car as a part of it, you need drive-in movies, drive-in diners. And if you're a young man and you wanted to court or you wanted to date a young woman, what usually happened was that you'd go to the house and you'd sit in the shadow of the parents and the grandparents, and you would, talk and you would chat and you'd go on a few of these and then decide, okay, I like you enough to get married. Well, romantic culture now is going to head towards a drive-in, a diner, somewhere else. And by 1927, most of these models are hardtops with windows so that you could get lost and make some really bad decisions as a young couple during this time. And so the whole way in which you would date and court and romance is going to be altered as we move forward. Now, the other side of everything that's happening with us, the benefits of automobiles and and everybody's seeing the benefits. They're not necessarily seeing the downsides that we're looking at today. But the other side of that is the electrification, and what does it do for us, and what does it allow us to do? Well, it'll give us not time-saving, but labor-saving devices within it. And the majority of urban environments are going to be electrified by 1925, 26, 27. This is what fuels this industrial boom. If everybody's buying a toaster, everybody's buying a refrigerator, well, we need to produce them. We need to produce them at industrial capacities. Well, washing machines and all of this stuff were made to a standard to last. They were made to a standard of reliability that we simply don't have today. And so once you bought them, you had that handled. When's the last time you saw a small appliance repair store? I remember seeing them all around during the 1980s. You don't see them anymore because these things are now recyclable. They are disposable to a lot of different ways. If you look at a television repair shop, it's almost cheaper now to buy a new TV than it is to get the one that has just gone off fixed. And so while we're electrifying and while we are industrializing all of this, and we're going to sell them the vacuums and you're going to sell them the refrigerators, they're built to last. And so you're not changing them every 10 years. This is going to, again, continue to impact us. Now, one of the most important things is this thing right here, the radio, the old Victrolas. These radios are going to become omnipresent. This is your television of the day. Everybody would have one in their living room. And on nightly content, first aired by NBC, the National Broadcasting Corporation, You can either tune in to an independent station, and again, the lettering of and the broadcasting of and the power of these stations and their coverage is going to help to nationalize and broaden American commonality and common experiences, along with film industry and movies that are no longer silent, the talkies. And people are going to listen to the radio every night. They're going to go to the movies on a weekly basis, and 100 million people going to a movie on a weekly basis. You would see the news, you would hear the news, you would see some of the earliest newsreels and you know, movies with a soundtrack on them. Couple that with your nightly programming on the radio, and what you have is a very distinctive national perspective. And that's going to be important for us to recognize. But the radio was the bringing together of the nuclear family. And then the 1950s, you'll also learn in and around the television for nightly programming. Now, in the 2000s, everybody has their own programming on their own device, and they seem to be more and more distant than ever before. But meanwhile, we're going to go to these radio stations. We're going to go to the newspapers, and we're going to advertise the American good life, the consumerization of it, the regionality of it, the sectional differences of it. They all start to become less distinct. Your national brands, your national stores. You could all go to a Macy's or a Sears and Roebuck or a Montgomery Ward or a Wanamaker's. These stores will all start to pop up. Now, a lot of these stores are no longer extant anymore, but these are the beginnings of our uniformity and our creating of a common culture. And while we're changing society and we're allowing women to vote, we're going to see this feminist push to gain equality stall and get distracted, because gaining suffrage was a good start, and then you would think you would continue to push and would continue to press with more women working out in the workforce than ever before. But what we'll see is, now that everybody's back from World War I, you want to go back to the way things were before. Women back to the household, men out there being the breadwinner. Unfortunately, this consumer spending of buying a radio and buying a refrigerator and buying a car meant that more and more women, even more married women, were into the workforce. And this is going to I don't know how to play it. This is going to put significant strain on households living at their absolute edge of their means. Today we'd call it, too much credit card debt of being a part of this consumer society. This is what's happening at this point. Now, instead of pushing social progress, a lot of times young women aren't going to join the feminist movement. They're going to rebel against the Victorian conventions of clothing, of hairstyles, of behavior, and the flapper, the shorter hair, the shorter skirts, the drinking, the smoking, the dancing in public becomes that rebellious, convention-breaking act, or an act of liberation away from the Victorian norms that had kept them down. Well, to a large part of the older society, they're going to see this as an erosion of the norms and erosion of the morals of America at this point. The influences of outside forces eroding America as we move forward. There was always this discussion that women had more leisure time due to all of these devices that are being forced into our homes. Unfortunately, not. These are not time-saving devices. These are labor-saving devices. They're not doing anything quicker. They're just keeping you from the labor, the hard graft that was once a part of so many of these household chores. Overall, the family becomes a little bit more nuclear. Okay, away from the extended, the 5 to 6 children, the heading off to work at a younger age. The 20s are going to see a more normal period of adolescence that we think of today. We've kind of extended the adolescence period all the way through college and everything else. But this is the first time where drinking and sexual experimentation had become the norm, and the focus on getting married, getting a job, building a family, providing for that family becomes less and less as we start to, to roar in the 20s. And it's going to be the 20s that provides us with that roaring idea and that celebrated idea for a number of different reasons that we'll continue to talk about. Now, in these roaring 20s, most everybody can identify who this guy is. It's Al Capone. He becomes a central figure in, crime and the mafia at this time in Chicago and nationwide. And they get their start because of the Prohibition movement. The idea that we're going to try to make society a better place by eliminating drinking, prohibiting drinking. Well, all it really did was create a criminal enterprise through the production of and the smuggling of and the provision of alcohol. Most people in America regarded it as a harmless vice. And so underground speakeasies, bathtub gin, the ability to distill spirits in your home of low quality but high alcohol content really does foster the development of the mixed drink. Nobody really thinks about, where do we first get our rum and Coke? Well, if you've made this rum in your home, it may not taste so good. It may not be aged so well. Or, bathtub gin and vodka were particularly easy to produce in one's home in small batch quantities. And so you've got to cut it with something. You've got to, in part because you don't know the proof, so you've got to avoid blindness, but also to make it taste better. Now, Capone is the architect of so many of the gangland murders in Chicago in particular, 500 plus gangland murders. But all of this continues to capture so many people's imaginations because it doesn't necessarily hit them on their day-to-day street level. They view the resistance of prohibition as a harmless crime of providing the people exactly what they want, and hence that Boardwalk Empire and Nucky Thompson, that show. It's worth checking out if you have HBO and are interested in all of that. But it makes the headlines and it becomes sensationalized, as we see, because how many movies are still made featuring Capone and the mafia, and some of the greatest movies of all time sort of center around all of these, or at least some of the most celebrated movies of all time, center around these themes and these ideas. Now, the other thing that was on the minds of the American public at this point is sports. Baseball was the national pastime, and it had just suffered a major scandal in 1919 with the allegations of the Chicago Black Sox or the White Sox, throwing a number of games in the 1919 World Series. It led to 8 men being permanently banned from baseball, including the tragic story of shoeless Joe Jackson. Well, baseball is going to try to clean itself up. And what they need is somebody to distract them from the scandals of the 19 teens. And who emerges across the 20s? A guy that's going to change the way people viewed baseball. It was an everyday player, pitcher, and outfielder on the days he didn't pitch, named George Herman Ruth. Now, he's a member of the Boston Red Sox, had an ERA around 2.5, which in those days was still very good. Today it's outstanding, but back in those days, that was a very good ERA. He was a promising pitcher. But then, of course, he sold from the Boston Red Sox to the New York Yankees, and in the 20s really ushers in the the age of the Yankees and curses the Red Sox all the way until 2004, the curse of the Bambino. By 1927, his hitting style, his home run prowess, radically altered the way the game was played, and by 1927 made baseball the well, the high point of everybody's day-to-day lives. You'd go to day games because there was no lighted fields. You'd go to the day games. You'd listen to them on the radio. My dad still listens to baseball on the radio. He prefers it because that's how he grew up, listening to baseball. He didn't watch it on TV. He listened to it on a radio. In golf, you have America's first and the only, at that time, winning the Grand Slam, Bobby Jones. He won the U.S. Amateur and the U.S. Open. Then he boarded a ship in 1930 and won the British Amateur and the British Open. That constituted the Grand Slam of the day. In a single calendar year, spending a few weeks on a boat as well, which was very, very interesting. Jack Dempsey captures the imagination of the boxing world through his heavyweight endeavors. In football, the fledgling sport of football, the great college star at Illinois, Red Grange, joins the Chicago Bears. And of course, radio is going to start to broadcast football games to us. And even a Grand Slam winner in tennis, American-born Bill Tilden, is going to capture the American imagination here. And these people become iconic individuals. They become iconic in their idea. And here's Ruth in a slimmer down. This is him in his 19 teens, sort of pitching body. Bobby Jones, Dempsey, Grange, Tilden. This is Yankee Stadium there in the Bronx. And as you can tell, the Bronx aren't necessarily that developed at this point, but Yankee Stadium is enormous, and you're going to see that place continue to be packed day after day after day after day. Bobby Jones is going to be the only golfer to ever receive 2 ticker tape parades down Wall Street for first winning the British Open and then winning the Grand Slam in that year. And it seems ironic that a golfer is going to get all this, but golf was highly celebrated at the time. He was, the one bringing the popularity of golf to the masses prior to Arnold Palmer, and then in your generation, Tiger Woods. Other things that are going to capture the imagination of the people are going to be the private achievements of citizens like Charles Lindbergh, flying across the Atlantic in 33 hours straight. Gertrude Ederle, swimming the English Channel, becoming the first woman to do that, braving the coldness of the water and the high currents and everything else. These types of private enterprise, individual achievements will, again, capture the imagination of the American people as they try to distract themselves from the realities of their drab industrial lives. And of course, Lindbergh will come even to greater fame or infamy later with famous kidnapping stories and everything else. But the first to fly across the Atlantic Ocean solo and flying at points, 10,000 feet in the air in an open cockpit plane, but also, flying at the tops of the waves to avoid icing up in the higher elevations at the time. So it really was a marvelous individual achievement, in doing it in 33 and a half hours solo. Staying awake that long, staying cognizant that long is always a very significant challenge. But you'll also see dance marathons and flagpole sitter. You'll see all kinds of these things that become the crazes of, the distractions of the American people as we try to forget World War I and forget the industrial world that is crushing the individual as we move forward. In the arts, you get the flourishing of jazz, both George Gershwin, but also African American jazz in Harlem and the Harlem Renaissance. And of course, Art Deco building, decorative features for no other purpose other than to be decorative. But that Harlem Renaissance, both in African American plays, literature, music, exploding in New York City as those neighborhood divides are still present in and around. African American communities and white communities are crying out against the materialism, against the impact of the industrial world and World War One, and it is this great surge of creative material that is marked by the early 20s, and coupled with such an odd paradox, coupled with the materialism and the consumerism of the 20s as we move forward. Now, if you live in the rural localities, one of the things you're afraid of is the importation of European radicalism and the erosion of your traditional values. The saloons, and hence the temperance or the prohibitionist movement, brothels and communism, and the erosion of your sexual morality was really a fear of small town America. And because of the war and because of that nationalistic sort of fervor that is unleashed, the back countries of the United States are going to be yearning for and wanting unity, conformity, and looking for someone to blame. And we look at the immigrants as someone to blame. And what they're going to try to do in a lot of different ways is root out anything that we deem as un-American, and hearkening back to the values of the 19th century before all of these new immigrants started pouring into the country. Now, this is a theme that continues to roll, goes in ebbs and flows in American society, and it will continue to ebb and flow. But right now, this fear of radicalism is focused on Bolshevism and the Bolshevik Revolution and the successful solidification of that revolution in 1919. Now, the Red Revolution was I want to say it's successful, but it was present, and at least in the major centers of power in Russia, successful. We'll continue to fight for a couple of more years on trying to solidify it across the whole of Russia before it becomes coined as the Soviet Union. 1917, they withdraw from World War I. 1918, they sign a separate peace treaty and oust themselves out of the war. But our fear of Bolsheviks, our fear of that Red Revolution, and we start looking at our communities, our anarchists, our socialists, our communists, and we're afraid that there are far too many foreign-born radicals here in America, and that they are trying to turn everyone communist. And here you've got, your anarchist here placing a bomb behind poor Lady Liberty. Now, they're very relatively small in number, only about 60,000. What we would consider true card-carrying Bolsheviks in America in 1919. But of course, they're highly visible, and they're going to coincide with the belief that they're the ones instigating these strikes and walkouts and riots. Because that's what's going to happen when you take government controls off of industry and you allow them to return to normalcy. They don't want to continue at those limited hours. They don't want to continue with those high wages, and so they extend hours, they lower wages, and so people strike, walk out, and it always seems to descend into riots and disorder. So we're going to make the equation. All right, socialism, Bolshevism, all the same. Murders, chaos. Where does America go? Well, labor is following that path, and it has to be these Europeans that are leading us down that path. That association becomes even more pronounced because the strikes are going to be associated with bombings, and in particular mail bombings and package bombs, some sent to very prominent New Yorkers, Seattle mayor, and of course A. Mitchell Palmer, who was a government functionary and will eventually become the head of the FBI. Now, all of these were intended to detonate on May 1st, and across Europe, May 1st had always been tied to International Workers' Day and anti-capitalist, industry sort of demonstrations that were always very prominent in these time periods. The result is that the government is going to crack down on foreign-born radicals. You're going to see anarchist, communist. If you were an IST, you're going to be arrested and you're going to be deported. In December of 1919, they sent almost 250 people to Russia. Not even sure if they were from Russia or not. Okay, 4,000 rounded up later in December. You're going to see search and seizure protections violated, no warrants, aliens deported without hearing. This is an extreme, violation of our civil liberties and our Bill of Rights protections. But it's consistent with our fear. When America is afraid, we'll violate the hell of our Bill of Rights to protect ourselves. And this one is relatively consistent here. The American people, what do they want? They wanted the ists and the isms out. Get rid of the communists, get rid of the socialists, get rid of the anarchists. If you had to put them on a ship, fine. If they don't get on the ship, shoot them. SOS. That's your choice. Get on the ship or shoot them. Centralia, Washington, a purported radical is going to be in jail waiting for deportation. The people of Washington weren't having it. Posse shows up, drags him out of jail, castrates, shoots, and then hangs him as an example for all other would-be radicals. America is taking a very violent turn against reformist tendencies, whether it's socialist, whether it's communist, whether it's any of these ists tendencies. Okay? Eventually, the Red Scare goes too far. Okay? The Department of Labor, they start demanding that these anarchists and these labor activists get due process before being deported. And our good man, A. Mitchell Palmer, who at this point is your Attorney General, he overplays his hand when he warns of a massive 1920 May Day revolution. Mobilizes the entirety of the New York City police force. In the end, nothing really happens there. No bombings, no violence take place, and people realize, okay, the hysteria isn't quite what they thought. Now, America does a hysteria very well. We get very afraid of things, and we go way too far, and we have a history and a pattern of this type of behavior. A. Mitchell Palmer fades into a rather historical obscurity aside from his time as Attorney General and his creation of the FBI. But unfortunately, we weren't really done with rooting out foreign-born radicals across the 20s. We're going to find them and seek them and put them on trial. And the most emblematic of these cases is going to be the case of Sacco and Vanzetti here. Nicola Sacco and Bartolomeo Vanzetti are Italian anarchists, foreign-born anarchists. They're arrested in 1920, accused of a payroll robbery and murder. Now, they didn't do it. The court case was relatively clear in that, but the jury of their peers didn't necessarily care. They were on trial for being Italian anarchists in America. Rather than guilty of this specific crime, they're guilty of being anarchists and subverters of American democracy, and therefore they're going to be electrocuted on August 23rd, 1927. But this is our first of the Red Scares. And when we talk about the 1950s and the Cold War, it's nothing new. America is afraid of Bolshevism. They're afraid of communism. They were afraid of it prior to 1917 and the Bolshevik Revolution. And they're going to continue to be afraid of it more and more as we go forward. In the localities and in the rural areas, what you're going to see is the reaction to this type of reform and this type of influx of foreign-born radicals is going to be the revival of the Ku Klux Klan. The Klan had been relatively successful in undermining Reconstruction across the 1860s and 70s and 80s, and it faded into obscurity. But it's going to be revived in 1915, and the fuel of post-war change is going to rev up the Klan and their activity. Who are they campaigning against now? It's no longer just Republican and no longer just African American and freedmen. They're going after immigrants, they're going after Jews, they're going after Catholics alike. They're even going to go and protest and march against Notre Dame University for being a Catholic university. They want to see the return of the moral fiber of America. They want to strip women of this newfound liberation, and they want to make sure that immigrants coming in Americanize. And of course, in the South, African Americans who had served in the military and had served overseas or had gotten out of the South had realized that not everywhere was Jim Crow, and they wanted expectations after fighting for their country and making the world safe for democracy. Well, the Klan is going to revive itself to crush those expectations with beatings, floggings, lynchings of anyone who failed to conform. The modern Klan was anti anyone who wasn't, white, Protestant, Christian. By the mid-20s, they estimate that there was possibly 5 million people and members in the Klan, not just in the South. It was more of a widespread, nationwide sort of eruption. The government is going to take action under Calvin Coolidge, and you're going to see laws put into place to force the Klan back into the shadows. But in a lot of ways, the Klan fades back into the shadows because their job is going to be effective. Restrictions on immigration and the push of the 1920s to Americanize immigrants is going to be very successful, and therefore you'll see the Klan retreat into the dark and murky shadows. And like I said, that immigration restriction is going to be expressed in that same sort of nativist feeling that brought the Klan back. Organized labor, and in particular the AFL and others that are focused on real world practical benefits. We're not talking about the burning down of capitalism and establishing a workers' utopia. A lot of the organized labor that is looking for immigration restriction, they simply want to keep the wages at a certain rate. And the influx of a steady diet of poor, unskilled immigrants drives wages down. And so labor is going to look towards Congress, and Congress will respond in 1917 with enacting literacy tests to restrict immigrant numbers. Wilson vetoed it. Congress passed it over his veto. Now their wave is, of course, their main worry is this wave of war-ravaged European immigrants coming, driving wages down. And so in 1921, Congress passed the Emergency Quota Act, putting a quota on immigration to 3% of the U.S. residents in the 1910 census. But that still allowed 500,000 Europeans in 1923 to immigrate, half of them of this new, poorer, stranger immigrants. So in 1924, they passed the National Origins Act, limiting it to 150,000 immigrants per year, 2% of each nationality as of 1890. So that is going to skew it more towards the British, the Irish, the German, the Nordic regions. And of course, Asian immigration in a lot of different ways to the West Coast is going to be banned. So the welcome mat for America is going to be pulled out. That give us your tired, your poor, your huddled masses. From the 20s to the 60s, that idea is pulled. Now, it's at this point, it's a fear of radicalism, or it's a fear of anti-Americanism. In the 1930s, it's just going to stay as a reality of fear of the Depression, of not accepting penniless migrants because there's no jobs in America either. So these will stay up until the 1960s, and LBJ will release them. Now, that's kind of our roaring 20s, and people will look at the 20s and they will feel so nostalgic about the 20s because there's these great sporting heroes. And it was the last time that the people of America weren't afraid. In the 1930s, you're afraid of Bolshevism, you're afraid of the Great Depression. 40 is communism. 50s, thermonuclear war. 60s, war. 70s, stagflations, Cold War. 80s, Reagan, Cold War. People of this generation look back at it as the last decade that they weren't afraid and they weren't really worried, and that they could go about their lives and drink and celebrate and not be afraid. But they should have been afraid, because hidden amongst the the roaring 20s is economic weakness that nobody's thinking about just yet. And nobody's compiling all the statistics to view this picture as a whole. When you look at the core industries, the railroads, coal, and cotton industries in the South, those are all being crushed by competing industries. Automobiles for rail, electricity and petroleum for coal, synthetic fibers, and foreign cotton. All of these are going to hurt the core industries in America. And of course, agriculture is going to be the hardest hit, as the 20s, most of the farmers never really get a chance to roar because exports go down $2 billion. Per capita income never hits that 30% spike. The farmers never are going to have a chance to roar in the 20s. They're going to continue to be economically weak. And then as the 20s continue, you're going to see unprecedented droughts and the Dust Bowl conditions in the 20s. Labor is hurting, but nobody's really looking at it right now. There's no new jobs created, and mechanization is going to, as we said, increase production without the same increase in jobs. So not only are you not creating new jobs, we're producing more without the commensurate increase in number of jobs. But if you're middle or you're upper class, you're booming, you're roaring. Your managers, your bankers, your accountants, corporate profits double. And we're all going to start to invest it in speculation and in the stock market. But of course, the 20s have a hidden secret for everybody. As 1928 dawns, this man is going to be nominated for president. He'll accept the Republican nomination, Herbert Hoover. He had never been elected to a public office, but he had served with distinction throughout the Progressive era, first as the Secretary of Commerce and then the head of the World War I food program under Woodrow Wilson. In 1928, they are rallying at their convention, and they're giving speeches, and they're celebrating how great they are. And Hoover says that we today in America are nearer the final triumph over poverty than ever before in the history of any land. 6 months later, you're going to be staring into the abyss of the Great Depression and the stock market collapse. The problem is everybody's looking at America and distracting themselves, and nobody's looking at the broader economic picture, the worldwide picture. And we talked about how 1893 signaled to America that as New York and as the West Coast goes, so goes the interior. It was a national economy, and you can't have regional insularity any longer. The 20s, if people were paying attention, should have been the signal that you can no longer have national insularity. Industrialization meant that America had become a worldwide economy. And as Europe goes, so goes America. But that's something that we'll talk about as we move into the coming of the Great Depression. I just wonder if he'd have known what was coming for him, if he'd have known that he's going to become the most hated man in America, would he have accepted the presidential nomination? Would he have taken that job? Well, that's something we can look at when we get to our next lecture.